Welcome, everybody. For those who have been watching week in, week out, you guys know that I am an avid reader. I read 70 to 100 books a year. And tonight we have someone with one of the most incredible stories, and he has written one of my favorite books of all time. It is Mr. Tom Jones, who wrote From Willard Straight to Wall Street. He was the former president and COO of TIAA Creft, the chairman and CEO of Global Investment Management at Citigroup, and he has been on the boards of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Freddie Mac, Pepsi, as well as Howard and Cornell universities. And we're going to hear his incredible, incredible story, because those are just chapters in his incredible life. And if you could see my book, you will see that it is all tabbed out. There's actually notes that I took as I was reading it, because I found that there were so many lessons on every single page. So before we get to Mr. Jones, we are going to have our incredible panel of high achievers quickly introduce themselves so we can get to Tom and his incredible story, starting with Dr. Susan Bernstone.
Hi, everyone, and it's so nice to meet you, Tom, and I can't wait to hear about your story. Oh, my God, that was very impressive. Good to see everybody. I am Dr. Susan Bernstone. I'm in the field of mental health, as well as a television talk show host and producer, and I aim to help people in terms of actually being their own best friends and changing relationships so that we can all change the world for the better. So that's... And thank you, Ruth, for doing these.
Always. Thank you. Dr. Kelly Couric, so good to have you back. And Kelly has a statue of herself at the airport in Dallas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Ruth. Hi, I'm Dr. Kelly Couric. I'm an astrophysicist who studies the sun and to try to understand why the sun throws temper tantrums, and she's trying to kill us and try to prevent that. So I work on satellites and instrumentation, as well as mentoring and working on making sure that the next generation of scientists can do this amazing work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and good to have you back. How's the new job?
It's amazing.
Oh, so glad to hear it. Thanks. Dr. Bruce Wiley.
Yes, I'm Bruce Wiley. I'm hovering in a balloon above New York City right now, as you can see from my background. I do not have a statue of myself in any airport.
Yes, you can always add yet.
Scientist, professor, journalist.
Thank you, Bruce. The fastest person here by far, Mr. Devin Harris.
Well, good morning. Good morning. So great to be here, Tom. Wonderful to meet you, man. I can't wait to hear your story. It's always great. I see Murphy is acting up again. When I grow up, I want to be like Kelly. I'd like to have a statue in an airport anywhere. Now I have to settle for being a 3-time Olympian, founding member of the Jamaican bobsled team, author, motivational speaker. Just tries to encourage and challenge people to keep on pushing and live their best lives.
Thank you, Devin. And Devin is one of the people who is going to be featured in my new book, The Success Factor. Ms. Janice Lintz.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm Janice Lintz. I'm CEO of Hearing Access and Innovations. My goal is to change the world for people with hearing loss. And most of the significant projects in the United States with ear symbols on taxis, subway information booths are some of my successes. I'm also traveling to every country in the world, and I've been to 194 countries, territories, and unrecognized nations.
You got me beat by a lot. Dr. Allison Escalante.
So I am fascinated by how modern life is both amazing and a complete mismatch for our biology and what our biology is adapted to do. And this creates a lot of anxiety for us and a lot of unhealth, and we don't know why. So in order to figure out what's going on, we look for something to tell us what to do. We look for shoulds to guide us. And our culture has become a culture of anxiety and criticism that I call the should storm. Should storm is most powerful in parenting, and it's driving an epidemic of anxiety of record proportions among our kids. So I write about the science of human performance for Forbes. I write about the culture of anxiety for Psychology Today. I love to speak, and I'm an adjunct professor of pediatrics at Rush Medical College.
Thank you. And my favorite photographer who always makes us look good, Susie Katz.
Hi. So I'm a photographer, and I've been spending most of the last decade or so on my educational nonprofit called Photo Wings, where we try to use photography to help people think out of the box for self-discovery, critical thinking across cultures, generations, and disciplines. And I love being part of the Mentor Project. I think you're doing really wonderful work.
We are, thank you. And this event is being hosted by the Mentor Project, and Dr. Debbie Heiser, behind the scenes, the CEO, is making all of us look good. Everyone here is volunteering their time. So if you have a question, please just put it in or just give us a shout out. Let us know where in the world you are watching us from. The audio from this is converted to a podcast, which comes out on Sunday. So please leave us a rating and review so other people can find us as well. Now to our special guest for today, the wizard from Wall Street, and one of the people with the most inspiring stories I have ever read, Mr. Tom Jones. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Ruth. I'm delighted to be here.
Did we lose Ruth?
It seems like we did. I don't see her on my screen.
You guys hear me?
Oh,
I
there you
got
go.
kicked off for a second.
There she is.
I was going to ask Tom about his life. I was really interested.
You could just take over.
I'll just take
Tom,
over.
Tom, tell us what made you write this book? And we didn't even talk about the picture on the cover yet, which we'll get to in a moment. But what made you write it?
Because I feel that I'm the part of the what I call the transitional generation in Black America, meaning that generation which came at the tail end of the historical period of severe racial oppression and discrimination built into the law. So I went to Cornell in 1965, which is the same year as the Voting Rights Act was passed and the other major civil rights legislation. And I'm at the end of that 400-year historical period of harsh Black oppression, but I'm at the beginning of what has become now a 60-year, 55-year period in American history of the country trying to remake itself and become more open and egalitarian. And there are a lot of experiences that I've had as part of that transitional generation. And I think they're worth sharing because historical perspective is useful. And that's what motivated me to write the book.
And I, for one, am glad you did. And I'm hoping you could take us through your life, much of which you described. So where did you grow up? And tell us where you grew up and what your parents did, because I think that's a key factor in this story.
The most formative years were in New York City, living in St. Albans, Queens, which was at that time, the mid and late 1950s, early 1960s. St. Albans was the Black community in New York City, which was arguably most prosperous. I mean, that's where people like Roy Campanella and Count Basie and Duke Ellington had their houses. I wasn't in the same neighborhood within St. Albans as they were, but St. Albans was a very nice community. At that time, in the late 50s and early 60s, middle-class families came to New York in part because of the quality of public education the excellence of many of the public schools and the excellence of the New York City universities, City College of New York and Hunter College, considered to be kind of the CCNY was considered to be the poor man's Harvard. So there was a lot of, and I would say that if you were going to pick any city in America to be a young Black person in the mid and late 50s, early 60s, any city in America where you might escape being scarred by severe, harsh racial treatment, New York City was probably the best chance you might have. And so I had very positive experiences. I never had severe racial confrontations or ugliness in New York. At the same time, my parents were both from the South. My dad, born in North Carolina in 1909, and my mom in Virginia in 1911. And they had both worked themselves up from poverty, believed in education. My dad had first become a minister because that was the avenue of opportunity most open to a Black man in America in the early 1900s. But he really wanted to be a scientist because he felt that science was objective, science was colorblind, science was a field where it didn't matter what your color was. And so he eventually got his master's in physics from Indiana University, became a licensed professional engineer, and was working on the United States Atlas missile system, which was part of the space competition with Russia. The Atlas missile became the primary launch platform for the US, and it was in the context of that space program employment that we were living in New York City because my dad was working at a company called American Bosch Arma, which was in Garden City, New York, just over the line into Nassau County. And so I had well-educated parents. We were a very comfortable family economically, and I had very positive experiences in the New York City public school system.
And you did well because you skipped 2 grades.
That's correct. At that time, in the late 50s, early 60s, the educational philosophy was to accelerate students that they felt were exceptionally bright, and that philosophy has changed over the years. Now it's a philosophy of enrichment. But so I was accelerated and skipped the 4th grade and the 8th grade. And so when I went to high school, I was 12. And when I went to Cornell University in 1965, I was 16.
And what happened on your first day at Cornell?
Well, when I got to Cornell, I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. I mean, really, this is one of the most beautiful campuses in the country.
That it is.
There's a strong New York flavor at Cornell. Quite a few students from all over the country, but you might say it's dominated by the Northeast, and especially by Jewish kids from the New York City area. Many of those kids were the same kind of kids that I had gone to school with in New York City. So, I was very comfortable with these kids. I knew how to get along with them. And so, one of the things that happened early in that freshman year, I was a very, very good athlete, but by the time you get to the college level, it's tough if you're only 16. And now it's very tough to compete against people that are several years older than you, and all those extra years of physical development and skill training and so on. So I knew I was not going to be an athletic star. I'm trying to find, what am I going to do? How am I going to make a name for myself? And ended up being recruited by a group of Jewish upperclassmen to run for freshman class president. I had actually applied to be, selected as one in the screening process to be one of the candidates selected to run for election, I had been screened out by the screening committee. And then this group of upperclassmen, having seen that I was screened out, said, well, that's nonsense. You ought to run anyway. And they recruited me to run on a write-in ticket. And we won the election. And so, I became the freshman class president. Not that that has any significance, because there's nothing that the freshman class president does, but it was a fun introduction to campus life at Cornell.
I love it. And my notes here say that you were the first Black president in Cornell's history.
That is correct.
So you were making waves early on. Now, what happened when that story changed a little bit, which led to the picture on the cover of the book?
Well, that year, 1965, Cornell made a significant effort to begin to recruit significant numbers of Black students. One of the interesting things about Cornell's history is that right from its founding in 1865, Black students had been admitted to Cornell, Black students and women. And in fact, in 1906, there were enough Black students at Cornell that the first intercollegiate fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, it's a Black fraternity, was founded at Cornell University in 1906. So there were enough Black students that early in Cornell's life to have a significant presence on campus. Now,
but that was not the fraternity you were in, though.
No. But all of that Black presence on campus had disappeared in the 1930s and 1940s. So now, when I went to Cornell in 1965, there were like 23 Black students in the whole student body, meaning of 12,000 undergraduates and 3,000 or 4,000 graduate students. There were only 23 students in that entire student body. And in my freshman class, there were 35 Black students, because Cornell was starting a recruitment push led by the president at the time, James Perkins, who had chaired the United Negro College Fund. And he just felt that he wanted to be a leader in showing the way for elite American universities to begin to bring a more significant Black presence on campus. So the main point is, many of these students who were recruited, Black students, came from very different backgrounds than I did. And so, I tried to be friends with everybody, get to know everybody. And as I got involved with those students, and, so for example, one student came from Little Rock, Arkansas, which meant that part of his life story just a few years earlier had been in Little Rock, Arkansas, when President Eisenhower had to send in the National Guard to try to desegregate the Little Rock High School. And I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of the hatred, the screaming, the white crowds out on the streets, just the hatred in their eyes, and they're spitting at these kids. And so this was his life experience growing up in that kind of environment. And as I got exposed to the kind of experiences many of these Black students had, I came to understand that, my life experience was not typical. I ultimately ended up over the next couple of years going on a deep, deep, deep dive, historical dive, to understand what had happened to Black people in America. How had we come to be in this position of subjugation and disrespect and oppression? And, I ultimately concluded that the reason that this had gone on for 400 years is that there had not been enough resistance, and that the only way it was going to change was if we raise what I call raise the price of oppression, which meant that more people had to be willing to fight and put their lives on the line. And I ultimately concluded, that it was like the random wheel of history, that I was just one of those people caught in this moment in history, this generational moment where we had to be willing to stand up and fight, put our lives on the line, and insist that America change, or else America would be shamed by the bloodshed that would be out in the streets. And so that's how I made that transition, the reason I made the transition. And the last little link there, the picture on the cover of the book, comes from the Black students had taken over the Student Union building in the spring of 1969 at the conclusion of a lot of conflict over having a Black Studies program on campus. And when we were in the building, a white fraternity, a jock fraternity, Delta Upsilon, broke into one of the side windows of the Student Union building and came in, deciding they were going to throw us out of the building because we didn't have any right, to take over the building. And I reacted immediately, punched the first guy in the mouth. We fought him. We threw them out of the building, and we decided, to bring in weapons. We did not have the guns when we took over the building, but we brought in weapons because one of the messages was, this kind of intimidation will not happen. I remember as though it was yesterday, it just flashed through my mind when I saw these guys break into the building. This is the kind of intimidation that happened after the Civil War. This is the kind of intimidation, the Ku Klux Klan deciding that they were going to intimidate the freedmen, intimidate them from exercising their voting rights and so on. And it just flashed through my mind that, no, we're not going to be intimidated. It's not going to play out that way this time. And we brought in the guns as a statement of, if you want to have this fight, so be it. We're ready for this fight.
And at the end, it ended peacefully.
It ended peacefully.
But not before the president of Cornell University had to resign.
Well, he resigned afterwards. There was so much blowback from Cornell alumni, the faculty, the administrators. There was so much blowback, kind of blaming him for, look at what's happened. It was your idea to bring these people up here, and now look at how out of control this has become. And so, President Perkins became the sacrificial lamb and was forced to resign in the aftermath of those events in the spring of '69, and actually the prior 3 years as well, as the tension had ratcheted up every year.
So you were graduated from Cornell after this. You got your degree from there, and you stayed there for a master's degree.
That's correct. And one of the reasons I stayed for the master's degree is also because I wanted to be sure that the Black Studies program was actually implemented. I thought that if people like me who had been involved in the fight to get the Black Studies program, if we left in the midst of the kind of angry backlash that was occurring at Cornell, I felt there's a good chance that the bureaucratic resistance will keep this program from ever actually seeing the light of day. And so I stayed because it was important to me that we actually accomplish something and that there actually be this Black Studies program on campus.
which is still there today.
Oh yeah, it's there today and has matured into one of the best in the country.
That's right. And you and President Perkins reconciled years later.
Years later,
And-
it always nagged at my conscience as I, matured over the years. And I'm a very reflective person. And it always nagged at my conscience that in a way, the person who paid the greatest price for the confrontation at Cornell in '69 was the white person, the white president, who was our friend, whose idea it was to let me try to dramatically increase the number of Black students at Cornell. And that just always nagged at me, that he became the scapegoat. And, it took me a long time, but 25 years later, it occurred to me to endow a prize in his honor, the Perkins Prize, for interracial reconciliation efforts on campus. And President Perkins came back to be part of the first Perkins Prize award ceremony. He had not been back on campus in a number of years. And, he just said, I can't imagine something that could have made me feel better, made him feel better and more fulfilled with regard to the rightness of the decisions he had made in the 1960s. That nothing could have been more fulfilling for him than to be part of this award ceremony in 1994. So that made me feel, that better late than never to reach out, to show respect to good people. And I was especially thankful, he died. He passed, 3 or 4 years later, 1998, 1999. And his family asked me to speak at his memorial service. And I was so thankful that I had been able to give his family and President Perkins some sense of completeness and honor and worthiness and recognition in a way that meant something to them. So just one of the lessons of life, you need to take time to care about people who make a difference along the way.
So true. And you've had, in your book, you describe several people who have helped you along the way. So let's talk about after you left Cornell until you became this big player on Wall Street in all of those companies that I mentioned. Tell us about briefly that story in between from your Cornell years to Wall Street.
Well, as it looked to me like America might be trying to change, and in 1969, 1970, 71, it wasn't clear which direction America was going to go. I mean, President Nixon had been elected, and think about that as a contrast to President Lyndon Johnson, who had gotten all of the civil rights legislation passed. So it wasn't clear to me whether America was going to move, it could move harsh right, which would mean suppression and oppression, a right-wing backlash, or it might move to the left, which meant in a more liberal direction and opening up. And it gradually became clearer that consensus, the political consensus in America was to try to move in a more liberal direction and to try to come closer to living up to the ideals that are, in the Constitution and the, Declaration of Independence. And I knew that, I said to myself, you need to try to go into the business world as opportunities begin to open up. And that's because I knew that that's where the toughest fight would be, that in a way, the pockets of wealth would be the most resistant to changing the status quo. Well, I didn't think I had much of a chance, okay? I'm the Black radical from Cornell. And I knew that label would follow me forever. So I had to think of, I said to myself, even though you're going to go into business, your odds of success are very, very, very low. You're likely, a lot of people are going to dislike you. People are going to make assumptions about you. You cannot approach this psychologically dependent upon getting positive and favorable feedback. You can't have that dependency because the odds are low. And so, I thought of how to prepare myself, and what I ultimately took me a little while to evolve it, but what I ultimately came up with was two techniques. And one was that I learned how to give 100% effort to excel at whatever my assignments were. And that sounds easy, but most people, including myself, are socialized to think that 90 or 95% is an A. And so that's the best you can do. I mean, after all, you got an A, so what more do you want? But 90% or 95% is not 100%. There's actually quite a big difference between 95 and 100. And I learned how to pull that level of effort out of myself and to sustain it. And the technique, my purpose in doing that was, on any given day, any given week, any given month, if you get fired, you can walk out with your head up because you know that you have done your best.
That's right.
Nobody can give that to you, and nobody can take it away from you. You're your own scorekeeper. So I learned how to do that. It started as a protective mechanism because I expected, to be fired, to fail. But it turned out that giving 100% effort actually differentiates you from the people that are around you. Because even in elite organizations, most people the very best operate at 90 or 95. And so if you're giving 100 and you're competent, you begin to attract attention because you perform at a slightly different level. It may not be all that obvious on day one. Just like, who cares if you get 90, if somebody else gets 95 on an exam and you get 100, who cares? Nobody cares. They got an A, you got an A. But those 5 points, if you sustain it, over the course of every day, every week, every month, after a year or two, it begins to be a gap between you and the people around you. It's cumulative, it compounds itself, and it makes a difference. So that was one technique. The second technique was I was very conscious of trying to improve myself every year. And I evolved a technique there, which was 3 significant goals every year. A physical health goal, meaning things like the amount of exercise I got, or, weight control and things of that sort. A what I would call spiritual or mental health goal. And so one year, I remember it clear as day, in 1982, I resolved to read the Bible from cover to cover, as my spiritual mental health goal for that year, because this was such an important book in the history of mankind that, you should not go through life without understanding for yourself what it says. Don't rely on how other people interpret it or what they say. You need to read it for yourself. And my third type of goal was a skills goal, a technical skills goal, something related to the work I was doing, how to be better, technically in my work assignments. So, physical health, spiritual and mental health, and technical capability. And, every year I would really think about it quite a bit, kind of in the November, December period. Beginning of January, I would put my 3 goals for the year at the front of my little pocket diary, and every month I would look at my goals and, kind of what have you done with regards to each of these 3 goals that you have for this year, and what have you got to get done in this next month. And that's very powerful, because if you can accomplish 3 significant things of self-improvement every year, that's powerful.
Yeah, that's
it's just very powerful. And so to wrap this up, I began to be noticed by senior people in the organizations that I worked in. And I did not understand this at the time, but the people that rise to the top of major corporations are often like sports coaches, because they can't do all the work themselves. So what they're really good at is building teams. And so they're very skilled at spotting talent, and people that they want to have on their teams. And so I started getting picked up by these kind of people. I didn't even know what was happening at first, why people were showing up at presentations I was doing, or, why somebody would end up being at a lunch that I was part of. But they were scouting me. And I eventually, got picked up. Every significant stage of my career, a mentor like that picked me up and brought me on his team. And that's critical, because you don't succeed without somebody trying to pull you up and help you out. And,
That's right.
Guys, that's how I got promotions. That's how I got compensation. But I returned, I did what I was supposed to do for them, which was top-notch performance, which made them look good. And so that's against all odds, That's how that story evolved.
But, Tom, it's interesting because of all of the extreme high achievers who I interview, I always say that the tippy top, there's actually a lot of room there. Because as you said, most people do that incredible work to become high achievers, but to become extreme high achievers takes that extra level of effort, which most people don't do. I think there's a ton of talented people out there, but there's a difference between talented and people putting that extra effort to get to the top. And then when you couple with that, those mentors that really help you along the way, that is just a super combination, because you have someone extremely talented, willing to put in the effort to get to that 100%. And then you have the mentors who have that social capital and can create opportunities for someone who they see is talented and willing to put in the good work. Win, win, win all around. What was some of that best advice that those mentors gave you?
Often it would be along the lines, they would want they would, if I had to characterize it generally, it would be that my blind spot, if I had a blind spot, it was in not spending as much time as they did looking to see who else was talented, looking, that I was so focused on myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I was so focused on my own survival and my own path and my own work effort and my own, 3 goals and so on, that, frankly, I had friends in the office, but, I wasn't deeply engaged. I had friends. And they were basically telling me, it's like, to get to the next level, to move to where they were, you're going to have to learn how to, get other people. Because again, you can't do all the work yourself. You have to learn how to find other people understand what their talent is, help them to bring their talent to bear, and elevate them as their work efforts help to elevate your organization. And that was key advice. I rose to the top in major corporations primarily because I learned how to elevate the work efforts of the people that were around me. After a while, it's not really about the work you do. It's about what can you do to get everybody else, to really, really work well and to achieve their highest potential.
Love it. So I know Susan and Janice are dying to ask you some questions. Dr. Susan.
Hi, thank you so much. I so appreciate hearing your story, and I can't wait to read your book. So I have lots of comments, but I'm going to start with a question. So in my language, and in the work that I talked a little bit about when I introduced myself, I consider that what you described that was in part responsible for a lot of your success was that you really were your own best friend along the way. And that's a lot of the work that I do, is to teach people how to become their own best friend. And when you described that 3-step process that you did, I'm sitting here like, yes, in those, the 3 areas and the goals. And I'm like, yes. So my question is, because I'm like your biggest cheerleader now, like I am totally impressed.
Everyone becomes a Tom fan.
Right. It's like amazing. Is what do you think was responsible or contributed, because it's a complex answer, to you being able to do that, given, and I know you talked a lot about what you didn't experience, right, in terms of the discrimination and the bad racial stuff. You did talk a little bit about your parents' education and what was important to them. But if you think about it through the lens of you being your own best friend and really thinking about, how do I take care of myself? How do I get what I want? What am I going to do to keep nurturing? Because so many people, even high achievers, don't do that. They're looking to, they reach levels of achievement sometimes to prove something. And those areas in their life are really compromised. But you achieved while taking care of the many different aspects of you. And I'm blown away. So what I would like to understand a little bit is, do you ever think about because I'm sure that you've noticed that that's very different.
Well, Susan, your observation is accurate. And there were 2 specific things that led me to be that way. The first was when I was first skipped grades in the New York City public schools. The other kids, as I went into the older grades, the other kids would put me down, right? I mean, kids can be cruel, And so now suddenly, I'm the youngest in the class. And so instead of being admired for, being smart, I'm being put down because I'm the youngest. And, fortunately, it just clicked for me of, I'm not going to let you make me feel bad about myself because I skipped a grade, I'm not going to let you have that power of definition.
Good for you.
And,
Well, that's an emotional maturity at any age. And to have that, there was some ingredient, something, we look at nurture,
at age 9,
Wow.
when I can remember it like it was yesterday. I'm not going to let you put me down, as though
Don't shrink your goals because of someone else.
Yeah. And so I just became very self-contained. And then the second thing that happened, while my dad was successful in his career, and he had really quite a few scientific publications in refereed journals and so on, he was still, he was the last hired and the first fired. So he made good money, but he never got into senior management. Companies would hire him when they had tough projects like the Atlas missile system I described, and he made good money, but he got fired as soon as that project was over. He would get laid off, okay? And so we lived a lot of different places. And, you know, New York, New Jersey, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Diego, Ohio. And so, you know, that process of constantly being the new kid in the school also, you know, some people welcome the new kid. Others are just very cruel to the new kid. And I learned to just where if you welcomed me, I welcomed you in return and was delighted to engage and have friends. If you didn't welcome me, well, I was okay with that too, you know. I was okay all by myself, you know. I just became very self-contained. And you know, you can't plan something like that.
Well, that's beautiful. Yeah, because you definitely rose to that occasion because most people don't, you know, and so that's kudos to you on many levels. So that's
multiple times. I mean, every time I thought, okay, something bad can't happen again, all of a sudden there's something else that happened. So it's that power from within that really, I think from a reader's perspective and from knowing you a little bit, Tom, I think it's what carried you through over and over and over again. So kudos to you. I think we all have a lot to learn from your experiences for sure. Janice, I think you had a question for Tom.
Yes, I'm really curious because Tom, you skipped 2 grades. So I skipped 1 grade and I was supposed to skip a 2nd grade. And I actually didn't want to skip a 2nd grade because I hated the fact that I already skipped 1 grade. And I don't think people realize it sounds great in theory, right? But being the puny kid, being so much younger, makes it really super hard. And I am like the first person to say, like, do not skip when it came time for my daughter to potentially be pushed ahead, like because of New York City schools. I held back. I did not want that. So I'm curious, how did you deal with that? Because growing up, that was really tough to be the youngest person. And I can't imagine having skipped 2 grades.
Well, you're exactly right, Janice, and I think it's one of the reasons why the educational philosophy ultimately changed to enrichment for, you know, the brighter kids, deepening the curriculum for them, but not skipping grades. And I think that, you know, if I had known better, I would have said, don't skip me. And, you know, I'm sure my parents would have also if we knew better. But, you know, at the time, it's an honor, right? It's recognition. But yeah, if I had to do it over again, even though it's worked out very well for me, I would make the choice of let me have the normal progression, stay in grade, stay, you know, kids my age. You know, I came through it okay, but it could have turned out very differently. And I'm acutely aware of how differently it could have turned out, because sometimes you do feel lonely, you know, sometimes you do feel like you're the outsider. Sometimes you do feel like, gee, you know, these girls don't want to date me because I'm too young, right?
But it also sounds like
one of the things that happened for me that gave me some measure of relief was by the time I got to Cornell, nobody knew I was 2 years younger than anybody else, right?
Except when you go out and you're carded and my mother, I don't know if I should say it publicly, my mother made a fake birth certificate for me so I could go out with my friends.
Well, that's exactly right, Janice. I mean, you know, at that time, the drinking age in New York was 18. I mean, how hard was it to get a fake card so you could go into the bars and everything? You know?
I didn't even drink. I just wanted to go in with everybody.
Right. So Devin. That was an enormous psychological relief to get to Cornell, you know, in this small town of Ithaca. and where the bars are just where students hang out. There's nobody in there that's going to really be a menace to you. And so that was a tremendous psychological relief. But it can be harmful to many kids, and I think you made the wiser choice, to slow it down.
So,
thank you.
Tom, your entire story is Devin's tagline, which is "Keep on pushing." Devin, I know you have a question for Tom.
Yeah, well, Tom, thank you so much for spending time with us, man. I could sit here all night at your feet and just soak up the energy and the wisdom from you and the insights from your experiences. I was speaking last week about diversity, and I'm listening to you enter corporate America in the 60s, early 70s.
Yes, early 70s.
A world very different from mine. I was still in elementary school, but living in America now and hearing and learning and understanding diversity and seeing it at play, certainly in terms of, most people think in terms of race and ethnicity. But here it is, you're a black guy, in a white man's world, being sought out, being recruited. And so I talk all the time about the importance for those of us who are labeled as minorities, whether it's because of your race, ethnicity, your gender, your religion, your sexual orientation, etc., that we have a responsibility to give, as you did, that 100%, so that you can support diversity. What are your thoughts on that? Curious to hear.
I think you're correct. When I was going through my talk, my comments, and I saw your picture on the screen, I'm thinking that what I'm talking about, the 100%, is something that Devon knows all about, because there's no way that you get to that elite athletic level that you achieve without knowing how to go through the pain and get yourself up to that 100% commitment. So I just, I know that you share that same kind of background. With regards to understanding diversity, working with diversity, one of the ways in which I was fortunate was that, when I was talking about that New York City experience and being living in St. Albans in the public schools, well, many of my classmates were Jewish. I mean, the New York City schools, still in transition, but we were in neighborhoods that were very integrated. And so when I talk about, Jewish kids were my friends. I hung out with these guys, and then the same thing at Cornell. I had a comfort level, and I joined a Jewish fraternity at Cornell, the most popular Jewish fraternity at Cornell, Zeta Beta Tau. So I was comfortable with people of different races, different backgrounds, different religions. I knew, we might have certain differences, but it didn't get in the way of friendship. It didn't get in the way of enjoying sports together and just hanging out together. So when I began to run into those situations in the corporate world, I was very comfortable in myself with regards to, I know how to get along with these people. And frankly, I just want to make this statement. My wife, I've been married for 46 years now, and got married in 1975. We had, been dating and living together for a year before that, 1974. My wife is the daughter of a Tuskegee Airman, the black airmen that were the first air group in World War II, sponsored by Eleanor Roosevelt, in a sense, for black men to be fighter pilots and fight against the Germans, because there was this belief, black men cannot fly the warplanes and so on and so forth. But my wife comes from that kind of background where, as a black family, her dad was posted to Japan, posted to Alaska, all, very interesting places, right? And so she had that same kind of comfort level with people of different cultures. And so the point I'm making is that then when the two of us were together with our peers and colleagues in those early years in the 70s and early 80s, with their significant others, my wife was a tremendous asset because they felt so comfortable with her. She felt so comfortable with them, and it made us just fit, it wasn't painful for anybody. And, it doesn't always work out that way. And, it's one of the barriers that minorities face, because you don't always get that easy fit, that comfortable fit. And you don't always have the background that makes it easy. And, but, I had the personal experience that made it easier for me. And then I had a spouse that had similar integrated experiences and intercultural experiences. And she was very skillful at putting people at ease and just maintaining conversations and, the light chit chat. It didn't have to be an earth shaking conversation, right? You're just chatting with people over, over lunch or talking about movies or whatever, and just getting along with people. And when people feel like you fit, you fit, you're not a threat. You're not a threat in the same way. You're not a problem, right? You're not an irritant.
Tom, I think we can all learn so much from you and from your experiences. I want to let Susie ask this the last question before we wrap it up for tonight, because I think with Tom we can all be here all night long, because trust me, we only just scrape the surface of parts of his story. But one of the things that he will tell you is that all of these pieces of the story were just chapters in the story of his life. They are not his entire life. And maybe he'll touch on that at the closing. Susie, you wanted to ask the last question?
Yeah, Tom, I'm so impressed with your life story and your resilience and your inner strength and wisdom at a very young age. I think you're kind of rare when it comes to that. So many people are insecure and will let those people beat them down. And I'm wondering what advice you would give to them. And also, your path couldn't have been a straight line. And what kind of self-talk did you use to pull yourself up when it wasn't a matter of discrimination? It was just things didn't work out the way that they might have. What kind of self-talk do you still use today?
Again, very insightful. And what I rely on is the lessons that my father taught me. He had deep, deep religious faith, and he believed deeply in the power of education, and he believed deeply in the power of hard work. So those are the three pillars of his life, okay? Faith in God, faith in education, and faith in just working hard, trying to accomplish something, trying to make something out of your life. And so those are the three pillars. There's a deep strain of religious thought and religious philosophy in my book, because I have had periods of enormous adversity. And it was only faith that enabled me to pick myself up and move forward. And, these days, it's kind of not very popular to talk about religious faith. And sometimes when I look at the Black community, or I look at situations, I watch stories like, I'm a big fan of watching things like public broadcasting and, the things they do the stories they do on things like the Black church and whatnot. And very recently they had a story about how the Black church is kind of losing the younger generation, that all these people out there demonstrating for Black Lives Matters very often are not in church on Sunday. And many of the churches that were the Black churches that were the real foundation, the rock and the strength of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s, those churches are dramatically emptied out. And when I see that happening, I say, these young Black people do not understand the history, that the only reason we have gotten this far is because of the spiritual strength that the church gave to the Black community in the most adverse periods. And if you walk away from that, you're not going to be ready when tough times come again, which they will. There's no such thing as leaving tough times behind you. It always returns in one way or another. And you need spiritual faith to get through that. It's one of the things I admire about the Jewish community. You can see Jewish people look like they're not religious whatsoever, but then you come to the high holy holidays, and you can see everybody goes back to touch base, and reaffirm their faith and their connections. And it's powerful, it's very powerful. So the answer to your question is that spiritual faith has played a big role in my life in the moments, the periods of adversity.
I will say, Tom, that you have never wavered in everything that has happened. And I think, as I said, we just scratched the surface on some of the things that Tom had succeeded in, that he achieved, that he had to overcome and endure. We really just scratched the surface. But one thing that was crystal clear was that he was clear on his goals. He was clear on what was important to him, what his values were, and he never once wavered from that. And that's when from the time he was a student to the time he was extremely successful, he never wavered from that and always remembered where he came from, which I think are incredible, incredible lessons to be learned. And on top of all that, he also remembers everyone who helped him along the way. So I want to thank Tom very much for spending his time with us tonight. I know we can be here all night long talking to him and hearing more of his story. So maybe he will agree to come back and tell us more of it. I want everyone to tell us where we can find out more about you. Not everyone got to ask their questions today, but if people want to ask our high achievers questions or follow up with you at any time, everyone tell us where we can find you. And then Tom, maybe you can tell everyone where they can find your new blog, which is something that they should read as well. So starting with Susie Katz, where can people hear more about you?
So you can see how I spend most of my time with my nonprofit Photo Wings, PHOTOWINGS.org. You can see some of my personal work at Susan Katz Photography. And if you go to the Mentor Project, there's 1 hour with the mentor. And I made a video which really kind of explains my work.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly Couric. I don't see everyone, so I'm doing this from memory.
Thank you, Ruth. Hi. You can find me at www.kellycouric.com. And there's something else brewing, but that's for a week or two from now.
Oh, we can't wait. You're going to have to tell us about that. And where can people see your statue?
Currently at the Dallas airport or Dallas Love Field Airport, but there's a new display coming soon.
Ooh, can't wait. Dr. Susan Bernstone.
I first want to just say, Tom, thank you so much for this evening, for sharing. I look so forward to reading your book. And what you just talked about in terms of the religious and spiritual aspect is something that people do not talk about enough. It's a theme that people have been embarrassed about, hidden. And I am so grateful that you have talked about that and acknowledged it here. And I can't wait to read it, because that I think this is so important. So I can't wait to even talk to you even more on so many levels. So people want to talk to me, they can find me. You can email me, Dr. Susan Bernstone @gmail.com. You can Google me. There, I have a website, LinkedIn, Mentor Project, every place. Please reach out to me. And also my show is called Your Voice with Dr. Susan. And that's also on public access television, but you can find it on YouTube channels, and more are coming soon. So thank you, everyone. And I look forward to hearing from folks.
Thank you. Our favorite Jamaican bobsledder, Devin. Oh, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, there. I tell you, the only time you can keep me quiet is when you put me on mute. Ruth, thank you so much for putting on this amazing gathering, as always. Always wonderful to hang out with everybody. My man Tom, just amazing listening to you. And I'm going to volunteer you for another session with Ruth and all of us. So I can be found at Devon Harris. Well, my email is devon@devonharris.com. My website is devonharris.com. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Keep On Pushing 88, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm the dude in the Jamaican bobsled uniform. So come over, say hello. I will happily respond.
We're missing your flag in the background this week, Devin.
Oh yeah, well, it's not far. There it is.
There we go. Dr. Bruce Wiley.
Yes, you can find me hovering above New York City most days, but and you cannot find me in the Dallas airport as a statue. If you Google Bruce Wiley, remember the Y, because there's a rumor has it there's someone else named Bruce Lee, but I'm not sure about that. Hasn't been confirmed yet. You can also
Tom Jones can make jokes about this as well.
There we go. We need to talk about that a little bit, Tom. But thanks, Tom. I appreciate your insights. Great stories, and look forward to hearing more about your life story. My website is brucewiley.com. If you want to read my stuff at Forbes, you can Google Bruce Wiley Forbes, and my Twitter account is Bruce_Y_Lee.
Thank you. Janice Lintz.
Tom, thank you for your sage advice. Really, I could listen all night. Really unbelievable. So I could be found at janicelintz.com or hearingaccess.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, but not really so much.
And Tom, where can people find out more about you and read your new blog?
My website is www.tomjones69.com. That's easy. 69 was the year of the guns at Cornell. So tomjones69.com, and email tom@tomjones69.com.
Beautiful. And what is your new blog?
The blog is on the website, talking about race, and it's just different vignettes. Started last year after the George Floyd tragedy in Minneapolis, and trying to offer observations and comments for how America can find its way out of the anger and confrontation and distress that the country now faces. And, one of the things that I try to do especially is to put as much emphasis on recognizing how far the country has come. You know, how much good has been accomplished in my lifetime, let alone, you know, the lifetime of, or you talk about going back to the Civil War, or even, you know, pre-Civil War with slavery. This country has changed amazingly, and probably more so than most people could imagine. Even if you described this country today to people like me in 1965, we would have said that's impossible. America could never change that much, but it has. And it's been a little bit of a surprise to me that with as much positive change as we've had, we don't give ourselves more credit for, gee, you know, we've done these good things. We still have this to do, but at least we've done these things, and it shows that, you know, if we keep up at this, we're going to end up in a good place. So I try to make constructive criticisms and then constructive observations, because I know, you know, I use the analogy, it's like raising a child. You know, if all you ever do is criticize the child and point out what's wrong, you break your child, you know? Your child can't survive that psychologically. You know, you've got to also recognize all the things they do well, the successes, the positives, you know? And then, yeah, you're great at this, you know, you could also work a little bit more on that, you know? But it's never this constant beatdown of, and it's what we do in race relations, is a constant negative beatdown of you know, what's wrong with the country. And there are plenty of things that are wrong, but there are also plenty of things that are, you know, that are much, much better than they used to be. And so the blog is devoted to that kind of discussion.
And I love that you're doing that. So Tom's book is From Willard Straight to Wall Street. Willard Straight is the name of the student union where the armed protests took place in 1969.
Right.
Wall Street is where Tom spent his professional career. So this is the book. This is the picture that was on the front of every major newspaper. So
That's
From Willard
actually
Straight to Wall Street.
That's a Pulitzer Prize winning photo from Newsweek.
There you go. There you go. Everyone, thank you for joining us on behalf of the Mentor Project and Dr. Debbie Heiser, who's behind the scenes making us all look good. She can, even if she hasn't already, put in the link to the Forbes article that I wrote about Tom Jones and his story. My name is Dr. Ruth Gotian. I can be found at ruthgotian.com, and social media, it's just my name, Ruth Gotian. And if you guys are free at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, I would love to see some friendly faces in the audience. I have an interview with Thinkers 50 tomorrow, and I could really use some friends out there because I'm a little nervous about it. Everyone, thank you very much to Tom Jones. I will see everyone next week. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.